we're using almost zero fossil fuel because we're simply not moving Earth around. Because they're permanent, you're standardizing much of your operations. So the first thing that you need to take into account is how to orient your beds. Is it north-south, east-west? That's not your main priority. You need to be orienting your beds for channeling excess water out of your growing space. If you have a slope, you want to orient your beds in line with the slope so that any excess water from excess rainfall will be drained away from your growing area. Another advantage of the raised bed, and that's an important one, is that you're always circulating in your pathways. So you're limiting compaction to only the area where you're not growing, which is really makes a lot of sense. By adopting this strategy, you're allowing almost zero compaction to happen. You're not moving a lot of soil around. You're raising your beds, making sure that all the excess water gets drained away from your growing area. So there's a lot of advantage that are built in to this fundamental way of using bed systems that are permanent. Then it's just a matter of finding the right tools to direct seed your crop, transplant your crops, and to work your soil the least you can to create this biologically active soil that's going to allow your crops to really thrive.
Raised beds provide better drainage and allow the soil to heat up faster in the spring. Because they're permanent, we end up applying amendments only where they're needed, on the beds themselves, and not all over the field like a manure spreader would do.
So when we're talking about permanence, we're talking about designs and customization. Our beds are 30-inch wide and our alleyways 18-inch. One of the reasons why the alleyways are 18 is that you want to make sure that when you're harvesting in a crouching position, you have enough space not to disrupt or to break the crop that is leaning in the back. One of the other reasons why you want to work in 30-inch bed system is that, again, in a crouching position, you have access to the center of the bed without hyperextending your back. This might sound like something not so important, but consider this: harvesting is half of the workload on the farm. That's what you're going to be doing half of the time that you're working in your market garden. So you want to make sure that you're comfortable doing this, especially if you're thinking about making a career out of it.
30 inches is also the width of most of the tools that we use, including many of the attachments made for the BCS walk-behind tractor.
The beds are standardized in their width, but also in their length. All of our permanent beds on the farm are 100 feet long. That makes it so that all of your row covers, drip irrigation, sprinkler lines, you need less of them because they're all the same size and you can move them around anywhere you want on the farm. We're using the bed, the 100-foot bed, as a unit of measure to calculate all of our inputs and also the yields of our productions. The beds don't need to be 100 foot per se. They could be 30, they could be 40, they could be 60, but they should all be the same length. So that's how you create uniformity and versatility on your farm. Bed preparation. It's a super important part of growing vegetables. On our farm, we've been following a minimal tillage practice where we try to do the bed prep without disturbing the ecology of the soil as much as we can.
We start with a bed that was covered with a plastic tarp. The tarp kills the weeds and speeds up decomposition of vegetable or green manure residues. When you remove it after a few weeks, you'll have a clean soil ready to be worked with. Every other year, we use a rotary plow to reshape our beds as they tend to level down over time. This attachment to the walking tractor takes the soil in the alleys and throws it back onto the bed, giving it more height, thereby increasing the depth of drainage and the growing space for plant roots. A pass with the broad fork then decompacts the soil down to about 12 inches. But does so without disturbing the soil's ecology or structure. Of all the bed preparation tools that we use on the farm, it's the only one that goes any deeper than the first few inches. This is definitely one of the secrets to creating a healthy soil for your plants to grow in. During the first years, we focused on building up the soil by applying 5 or 6 wheelbarrows of compost on each of our 100-foot beds. Over the years, our soils have improved a great deal and have a lot more organic matter, so now each bed will receive compost only every other year. For fertility, we also use a mix of vermicompost and chicken manure. The compost helps feed the soil with helpful microorganisms and organic matter, while the chicken manure gives the plant the nitrogen boost they need, especially early in the season. For the last step of bed preparation, we switched the attachment of the walking tractor to a rotary power harrow. The tines of this tool mix in the amendments to the first few inches of the soil, while the roller in the back firms and levels the ground. One pass with this tool leaves us with a bed that is perfectly conditioned to be seeded or transplanted in.
Following these guidelines, it takes me about 45 minutes to prepare 4 seed beds that are all 100 feet long. I think we've found a technique that is both ecological, economical, but most importantly, very efficient. So we're using not a lot of fossil fuel, we're creating great habitat for the plants, and we're doing it with tools that are not expensive.
The walking tractor we use is an Italian-made BCS unit. It's versatile, robust, and designed to do soil work on small cultivated areas. Just like a 4-wheel tractor, it can run different tools from a single power source, and its handlebars are reversible, so you can mount attachments in the back or in the front.
All composts are not created equal. Make sure that you're using the best compost possible. And if you don't know how to make it right, you should buy it. That's what we did since we started the farm, and I would even argue that it's one of the biggest factors to the success that we've had over time. By collaborating with people that knew what they were doing, we made sure that we were adding premium compost to build up our soils. It's not easy to make premium compost. So again, if you can't make it, or if you're not dedicated enough to really learn how to do it well, why not just buy it from somebody that is specialized in it?
Our strategy for when and how much to fertilize is directly related to our crop rotation. As I mentioned before, our farm is divided into 10 plots of equal dimensions. On each plot, we aim to grow crops of the same botanical family or with similar fertilization needs. Rotating crops every year makes it more difficult for insect pests or disease to establish and also reduces depletion of nutrients in the soil. Our rotation is based on 5 vegetable families: alliums, brassicas, cucurbits, nightshades, and another group we call light feeders, which includes legumes and some light feeder crops from all of the other families. In practice, it might look somewhat like this. On the plot where we'd grow nightshades the first year, we'd follow with light feeders, then alliums, then back to light feeders, moving on to summer squash and brassicas, so on and so forth. So we essentially would grow a more demanding crop every other year and add compost only on those years. When planning what to grow where and when, we also consider characteristics that will make maintenance more efficient. Crops that go together might be those that will be planted the same day, or those that all require row covers or insect nets. They can also be direct-seeded crops that we water with our sprinkler line. So one of the things that we've talked about is adding fertility to the soil by adding compost or natural fertilizers. But there's another way to do this by relying on what is called a green manure. Green manures are a crop that you're growing not to sell for market, but for different purpose, namely to add fertility to the soil. When you're growing certain legumes, such as peas, vetch, clover, these plants have the amazing capacity to take the nitrogen that is present in the air and bring it back down to the soil. And so when you're growing these legumes, you're actually adding nitrogen into your soil. For this exchange to happen though, there needs to be certain bacteria that are present into the soil. These rhizobium, they create little nodules on the root system which will allow this process of nitrogen fixation to happen from the air to the soil. And you can simply pull out the roots and verify if you have them in your soil. If you don't, it's not a problem because you can always inoculate your soil with these special rhizobium. Green manures have different functions, and there's a lot of green manures that you can grow, and you can always have a lot of combinations between, oats and peas, rye and vetch, whatever. What's important is to try to figure out what you want to do, cover up the soil in the spring and in the fall, suffocate weeds by growing something that grows really fast, such as buckwheat. There's all sorts of green manures that you can use with different functions, and the trick is to have the whole arsenal of them at your disposal to do many different things in the garden. One thing you need to know about green manures is that when you're growing them to add fertility to the soil, you're going to mow them and bury them. And it's going to take up to 2 weeks for your soil to digest these green manure before the soil is ready again to be seeded in. It's great because you're growing your amendments on site, but it's taking up a lot of space and time in your garden. This is valuable growing space. And that's why we're always looking for ways to either grow green manures, short green manures before a crop or after, or even to grow them while you're growing your crop. One easy example is you'll be having broccolis that are there, and a couple of weeks before you're ready to harvest them, you'll broadcast different seeds of green manure onto the soil, and eventually, as soon as the broccoli's heads are harvested, you'll have the green manure that is all reestablished and ready to take up the space. So it's really important never to leave your soil bare, especially in the winter months. So green manures or cover crops are then a great way to make sure that you're not doing that. Certain crops like rye in my northern Canadian climate can be seeded all the way up to October and November. They don't need to be fully mature. As long as you have something growing on your soil, you'll prevent a lot of the erosion that takes your fertility away when it's being leached by heavy rainfall, or in our case, the snowpack that melts in the spring.
So here we find ourselves in front of a really nice green manure of cowpeas that I've seeded 5 weeks ago. The traditional way of incorporating green manures is to till them under using a rototiller. That way the nitrogen gets back into the soil. In accordance to our minimal tillage approach here on the farm, we want to avoid the rototiller as much as we can. So the way we're going to go around that and making sure that we're still doing green manures is that first of all, we're going to use a flail mower to shred the green manure into bits and pieces. And then we're going to use a rotary plow to take the dirt from the aisle and shoot it onto the bed, burying the green manure into the top inches of our permanent beds. So this way we're not disturbing the ecology of the soil in the beds. This is a minimal tillage approach to dealing with green manures.
To speed up decomposition, we'll then cover the beds with plastic tarps for 2 or 3 weeks.
What's so great about these tarps is that when there's a crop residue, you can just apply these tarps and come back a couple of weeks later